Once upon a time, there was a war with lots of countries involved, and it was called World War I. And then the countries tried to be good, but in such a world, who were they kidding? So then there was another war with lots of countries involved, and it was called World War II. And afterwards, no one really knew what to do because the world was in shambles and everything was broken. So Germany, who was the antagonist in this post-war world, was divided into four parts, and France, Britain, the US, and the USSR all took one piece. But then the Soviet Union and the United States started to get testy with each other, and the East and West started to drift apart. So then this guy named Truman made a doctrine. He called it the Truman Doctrine. It meant that Greece and Turkey got money and guns from the US to ward off Stalin from the Soviet Union, who wanted some territory. Then this guy named Marshall announced his plan called the Marshall Plan. It meant that the US helped reconstruct Europe to keep communism out. Then there was this problem with Berlin, because there was West Berlin and East Berlin, and West Berlin was better, so East Berliners were going to West Berlin, and East Berlin was sad. So Stalin blockaded Berlin, but the Western Allies airlifted supplies in the Berlin airlift, so Congress was then convinced to form NATO, which committed the US to the peacetime defense of Western Europe. The Warsaw Pact was the Soviet version. Then there was a Chinese Civil War, and Mao and the Communists stayed on the mainland, and Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalists went to Taiwan. And Mao formed the People's Republic of China, and they were friends with the Soviet Union. So then the Korean War happened with the USSR helping North Korea and the US helping South Korea, and it ended inconclusively, except now we know that the war could happen without nuclear annihilation of the planet. Israel and France and Britain invaded Egypt to take the Suez Canal, but that didn't happen because Eisenhower was bad. So then Nasser in Egypt became an Arab nationalist hero, and Eisenhower made a doctrine called the Eisenhower Doctrine that said he would try to keep communism out. But that didn't work, so he accepted Arab nationalism, for the time being. Then there was this fuss about things flying through the air like the Earth satellite Sputnik and the U-2 spy planes. Meanwhile, over in China, Mao was wreaking all sorts of havoc with his Cultural Revolution. He attacked his own establishments and sent the smarties to the farms. Meanwhile, the Cuban Revolution is going on because these guys named Castro and Che wouldn't stand for the authoritarian rule of this guy named Batista, who liked Italians and fruit. So then Kennedy tries to take out newly instated Castro because he's communist, but of course the bagpipes fails, and Kennedy is embarrassed. Then Khrushchev over in Russia decides to put missiles into Cuba because he loves Castro and his fancy spontaneous revolution. Plus he wants to blow the US brains out if the US tries anything funny again. So then the whole world is freaking out and hiding under desks and the world is going to end. But then détente happens, of course, just in the nick of time. But then back in Asia there's a war in Vietnam, and that's the end of détente. We could talk about that for hours, but let's just say North fought South, lots of deaths, bad. So then China and Russia start to hate each other because their relationship was unhealthy in the first place. And they had the Sino-Soviet split. Then Nixon from the US visits Mao in China, and they sort of become friends. So there's this love triangle. Triangular diplomacy makes Russia all frantic and gives Nixon lots of power in Vietnam. In Chile there's a coup, in Nicaragua there's a coup, in Guatemala there's a coup, and in Panama there's a coup. Then the Soviets invade Afghanistan because they don't like Amin being in cahoots with the US. So then fast forward to a new US President, Reagan. He and Gorbachev in the USSR have a summit in Reykjavik and cut down their arsenals. Then Gorbachev decides to commit his nation to glasnost and perestroika. But that doesn't really work because people don't like that they're getting so capitalist and democratic and US-like. So then Gorbachev gets weaker and the USSR does too. Then Reagan says,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And Germany is reunified. In Tiananmen Square, they put a Statue of Liberty look-alike in front of the creepy Mao bus thing that comes out of the side of a building. Finally, the USSR falls, and Joris Belton shimmies himself in there and turns everything around, and that's the end of the Cold War. The end.